Hello. Uh, this is part 5 of the book I wrote. Women should run countries, mostly men should run economies, and 14 to 17-year-olds should get the vote. Part 5, as I said, I think I said, number 4 of my big 6 ideas. 14 to 17-year-olds must be allowed to vote, drive, live on their own, and work full-time jobs. People 14 to 17 are being wasted. They're being forced to stay in high school and learn little, especially if it is a public school. I'm middle-aged and I largely went to public schools. By the time I was done with high school, I had learned in all my years in public school only 3 things scholastically that I have ever recalled using at all since that time. 1 was how to write an essay. 2 was the Pythagorean theorem, which I think I've used 2 or 3 times maybe. And 3 was basic algebra, which I have used a few times. And I learned all of those things in grade 9, first year of high school. For the next 3+ years, I recall learning nothing that I have needed since. Not one thing. As I said, not one thing. It was a galactic waste. But by law, I had to go. Then one day when I was 16, I found out that I did not have to legally go to school anymore. So I immediately went to the office, confirmed the information, filled out a couple forms, went and emptied my locker, dropped off the lock, went to my car, and drove home. All of that within 15 minutes of hearing the initial news that I could quit. It's not that I hated high school, I just found it boring and totally devoid of usefulness. And later, when I went to university, I just took the GED tests in 3 hours or so, which were none too difficult in my opinion, and presto, I had all the high school credentials I would ever need. Now, I realize many people go to school with a goal and they find things at high school that they learn to try and attain that goal. Wait, I don't understand that sentence. Now, I realize many people go to school with a goal and they find things at high school that they learn to try and attain that goal. I still don't understand that. That's a perfect example of saying a sentence wrong. Who wrote this crap? Oh, yeah, I did. Now, I realize many people go to school with a goal and they find things at high school that they learn to try, and attain. I still can't say it right. Let me try it one more time. Now, I realize many people go to school with a goal, and they find things at high school that they learn to try and attain that goal. Okay, finally. I wrote the bloody thing, too. But most of the teenagers I knew while in school were not in that boat. So high school was a galactic waste for them as well. It's not that my school was so bad. It was not. I thought it was fine. In fact, compared to the other schools in my city, it seemed one of the better ones. But the fact remains that after grade 8, and certainly after grade 9, there was nothing that high school could teach me about the world that I did not already know from grade school. And the same with many other people. Also, the 3 things I did learn in grade 9, I could have easily been taught in grade 8. And if that had happened, then my entire time in high school, except meeting friends, social things, would have been a complete waste of time, scholastically. Now, if people know what they want to do and they can learn it in high school and they will need to learn it in high school to move forward in their chosen field, fine, then high school should be there for them. But for those who have no need for what high school offers, they should be able to forego it and go on with their lives. But now, high school is really just a glorified daycare. Unless you are 16 in most places, if not all, you must stay in school. You are often not even allowed to leave the school grounds during school hours. I found this out when I got mononucleosis in the summer between grades 9 and 10. I thought I was over it, so I started school in September. But I was exhausted, and it turned out I still had it. So I stayed home, and it took me a few months before I could go back to school. By the time I got back, 3 of the 4 classes I started, their teachers said I was too far behind and they refused to let me back in. In only one of my classes did the teacher allow me to continue drafting. So every day I would get on the bus, go to school, and take one class, the first one of the day. Then I would sit around for the rest of the day with nothing to do. I would stroll the halls, talk to friends, but did nothing really. I lived too far away to walk home, and the school would not let me leave to go to the park, mall, anywhere. I was trapped. Day in and day out for months until the semester was over. I didn't pass drafting as it turned out because I was too far behind to catch up. So the entire semester wasted, yet I was forced to stay in school on legal grounds. I should have been allowed to go where I please and do what I legally wanted. I could have got a job maybe, stayed at home, taken up a hobby, anything. For those reasons and more, 14 to 17-year-old people should be allowed to vote, drive, live on their own, and work full-time if they wish. And before you say 14 to 17 is too young to be an adult, I say total nonsense. In many cultures, 14 is considered an adult, and long ago children were forced to work full-time jobs. And most people of 14 years of age can father and mother children. And if you can do that, you're an adult, or pre-adult, to me. It's time 14 to 17-year-olds be treated as pre-adults. Excuse me, not quite adults. They have not stopped growing, so they're not fully developed physically, but certainly ready for far more rights and allowances than most have now. Why 14 and not 13? Several reasons. One, most people don't start high school until they're 14. I want people to finish grade 8 first, or at least have the chance to. Two, I would like there to be some sort of program online that 13-year-olds can study to learn about the basics of being an adult. It would not be complicated, but I want 13-year-olds to have completed a course, say a couple months, maybe less, that gives them a head start on adult life. Not the birds and the bees, but laws and rules that schools and even parents don't often teach. This course can be taken in their spare time or during the summer after grade 8. Once they have taken this course, they will be required to take a simple multiple-choice test. The test will be designed more just to prove that they actually took and understood the course rather than making sure they are experts at it. If they don't pass it initially, they can take it every 6 months or so until they do pass it. Once they do pass it, if they have also passed grade 8, they will be given a pre-adult card. With this, they can learn to drive, register to vote in elections, work in any job that they are qualified for, and live on their own if they wish to. As I said before, raising a child is the most important job in the world. I think I said that before. But well, it is. If a 14-year-old can do that, then they should be allowed to drive, vote, work, and live on their own. It is common sense to me. I think I would have been able to do all of this when I was 14. And I think most of my friends could have as well. But that was long ago. Now, today's 14-year-old is far more knowledgeable, thanks largely to the internet, than we were at their age. I see no reason why someone should be legally allowed to have a child, but not be allowed to vote or drive a car or work or live alone. I will deal with one at a time. Vote. I see no evidence that the average 14 to 17-year-old does not have enough knowledge of the world and or enough maturity, experience, and or common sense to decide who is and who is not good for their country, province, state, region, city, town to govern. And again, I think if they are old enough to be parents, they are thus old enough to vote. Drive. I believe in Canada it is legal for a 14-year-old to learn how to fly. In America, I believe it is 16. And not just learn how to fly, but to solo as well. It seems astronomically stupid to allow someone to fly a plane but not drive a car. It's not like Canada is some lawless country where people run roughshod over the law's rules. Quite the opposite from my experience. So if the Canadian government feels that a 14-year-old can fly a plane by themselves, then surely a 14-year-old can drive a frigging car by themselves. Work. I think this one is a no-brainer. Many underage people already hold down jobs, so clearly there should be no problem with them holding down one that is full-time. Also, many years ago, many children worked full-time for virtual slave wages. That is proof positive that 14-year-olds can do a fine job as full-time employees. And live alone. This has 3 phases for me. One is the ability, 2 is for the safety, and 3 is for human rights, for their safety. And 3 is for human rights. Again, if a 14-year-old can legally fly a plane in Canada and was widely thought of as perfectly good at working full-time long ago, then how on earth could they not be capable of living alone? What is so incredibly complicated? When I was 14, I was left alone in the house for days on end when my mother and my parents were divorced, went away for the weekend. I cooked my meals, turned the thermostat up in the morning and down before I went to bed. A simple task, obviously, just making a point. I did my laundry, could have cleaned the house, made my bed. I usually did neither. Shoveled the snow if it snowed, called the appropriate people if something went wrong, plumber, electrician, etc., and so on. It was a piece of cake. And it would have been for almost anyone my age as well. It's not that complicated. I would certainly say driving a car or flying an airplane, I have done both, would be a heck of a lot more dangerous and difficult, complicated, potentially. And with many teenagers on their own when their parents are at work and they are home from school, I would say this generation has much more experience at taking care of themselves than my generation did. Nope, I see no practical reason why a 14-year-old could not live on their own and do a perfectly fine job of it. As for safety, I was not thinking of burglars, I was thinking of being abused at home. Many teenagers are physically, mentally abused by their parents' guardians. But they are unable to leave unless they file formal charges. And then they will probably end up in a foster home. And that is a crapshoot as to how good that will be. But if a 14-year-old can legally work and live on their own, then they can escape a horrible domestic situation far more quickly than they could otherwise. And the faster they're out of a bad situation like that, the better. Human rights. In regards to my story from above, after I got mononucleosis and I was basically trapped in school, doing almost nothing, though I did develop a crush on a girl that I ended up becoming friends with, that I would not have had I not been in that situation. If I were self-responsible, I could have stayed at home or gone to school and jumped on the transit bus and explored or gotten a part-time job or a hobby or something other than trying to figure out ways to get to know Julie, the aforementioned crush. It is ridiculous that a 14-year-old can raise a child, but they are not legally responsible enough to leave school if they feel like it and go to the store. That is just nonsense. I remember another time in high school. After I quit, a couple of years later, I went back and tried it again for just a few months. And since I was 18, I was my own legal guardian. So I could come and go as I pleased. Whenever I took time off school, instead of having to get a note from my mother, I just had to write one to the teacher. And I could say in the note that I missed class because I did not feel like going or almost anything. I loved it. The freedom was fantastic, especially remembering how trapped I'd felt for all those years. And I did not feel much more mature at 18 than I was at 17. Certainly not enough of a difference that I was not capable of looking after myself at 14, but was at 18. The bottom line is being 14 makes you no longer a child. You are still growing as a human being physically, but you can pretty much do everything an adult can. In fact, what can you not do at 14 that you can do at 18? I can think of nothing. Yes, for example, at 11 and 12, many children cannot procreate yet. But at 14, most people can. And, yes, once again, if you are old enough to have raised a child, you should bloody well be allowed to vote, drive, work, and live alone. Now, what about potential limitations at 14 to 17? Driving might be initially limited to city limits, or not. Say under a certain speed limit, or not. I could live with limiting a 14 to 15-year-old to not being allowed to drive over 80 kilometers or on closed highways, or to have this limit in place for a certain period of time, like 1 year. Whatever the case, I am fully secure in the knowledge that 14-year-olds can and should be able to legally drive cars, light-duty trucks, motorcycles. The testing should be rather difficult, demanding, but this is to learn to drive alone at all hours, day or night. If a 14-year-old is able to live on their own, it is important they have access to being able to drive. And what about recreational drugs, especially if they are legalized, as I think they should be? I think since 14 to 17-year-olds are not full adults yet, although I think they are mentally, intellectually ready for adulthood, I do not think their bodies are yet. So I think they should be limited in some physical ways, like they should not be allowed to join the military or police force until they are 18. And I don't think they should be allowed to use all recreational drugs, alcohol, as adults should be. So I think 14 to 17-year-olds that have their pre-adult card should be able to legally buy pot and lighter rave-type drugs like ecstasy, but not the more serious ones like meth, cocaine, crack, or heroin. As for alcohol, I think they should be limited to drinks that have only about 2% alcohol by volume. Sure, they can still get drunk if they wish, but it'll take some doing. Perhaps there could be pre-adult bars where all these things are readily available. I think regular adult bars should be off limits to 14 to 17-year-olds until they are 18. Speaking of which, I have never understood why some countries allow 18-year-olds to join their military, but not to legally drink alcohol yet. They can die for their country, but not drink booze? That is utterly ridiculous. So, to sum up, this major policy consists of making it legal for 14 to 17-year-olds to quit high school, drive cars, vote in elections, live on their own, work as adults, other than police and the military and perhaps a few other professions, and have legal access to limited recreational drugs, alcohol. There would also be some limits sexually. It will be illegal for 14 to 17-year-olds to have sex with anyone who is not also 14 to 17 years old. And it would be very illegal for someone over 18 to have sex with a person 17 or under, even if the sex is consensual. And it would be illegal for 14 to 17-year-olds to partake in the adult entertainment industry as a prostitute, exotic dancer, etc. Though I think prostitution should be legal for anyone 18 and over. Excuse me, there are just too many reasons to me why 14 to 17-year-olds should be able to work, or to vote, drive, live on their own, work full time. In large part thanks to the internet, and sadly, thanks somewhat to parents tossing their children into daycares and forcing them to think for themselves, because their parents surely cannot be bothered to as much as they should. Wait a minute, that makes no sense. Let me try it again. And sadly, thanks somewhat to parents tossing their children into daycare and forcing them to think for themselves, because their parents sure cannot be bothered to as much as they should. Thanks to these things, the average 14-year-old is miles more mature, knowledgeable, and streetwise than they were even a generation ago, and certainly compared to those of 2 generations ago. And as I said, people need to be able to get out of bad home situations in terms of mental and or physical cruelty as fast as they can. And foster parents are not the answer. Sure, some are nice, but also for sure, many are not. A person in this circumstance has been through too much already. Let them live alone and get away from all these adults that have been mean, too controlling of her or him. Also, I have a more cold and calculating reason to let 14 to 17-year-olds vote, drive, live on their own, work full-time. Finances. The more 14 to 17-year-olds in the workforce, the more GDP is generated for that economy. Plus, the less people sitting at home going to school, generating nothing for the economy. Oh, plus, the less people sitting at home going to school. Try that again. The more 14 to 17-year-olds in the workforce, the more GDP is generated for that economy. Plus, the less people sitting at home going to school that are generating nothing for the economy. I'm going to do it one more time. The more 14 to 17-year-olds in the workforce, the more GDP is generated for that economy. Plus, the less people sitting at home and or going to school that are generating nothing for the economy. This is by no means the main, secondary, or even tertiary reason for me, but it is a bonus. And with the world getting older every day, and thus there being more people whom are not working and who need government assistance, it can only help the situation if 14 to 17-year-olds are generating money that can help, through their tax dollars, to pay for those growing numbers of idle seniors whom need government assistance. Finally, why not try it for one generation, 20 years? See how it goes. It's not like giving them this sudden freedom is forcing them to use it. None of these new laws would not allow them to live at home while they finish high school if they chose. It would not force them to act as adults. It would just allow them to utilize more adult rights. To me, 14 to 17 was a dead zone. I was fed up with school, but was not allowed to do much else. I was basically waiting to have the right to do something else other than be a kid. And a lot of people I knew seemed to feel the same way. And if we felt like that back 2 generations ago, the X generation, I cannot imagine how restless and fed up today's 14 to 17-year-olds must be. They are ready to begin life and contribute to the world, but are being forced by outdated rules to live the life of a virtual child. It's time to take that dead zone away. Let's give 14 to 17-year-old people the right to vote, drive, live alone, and work full-time. That was 4. This is 5 of the big 6 ideas I have. 5. Sane adults 18 plus must have complete control over their bodies. We must be able to consume anything we wish, drugs, alcohol, battery acid, anything, kill ourselves whenever we wish, live our lives as recklessly as we want to, regardless of the danger, so long as these actions do not directly cause physical harm to others. This COVID-19 paranoia is abso-fucking-lutely re-fucking-diculous. Those are two long words. It's all, excuse me, it's all over the fucking net that COVID-19 almost exclusively kills those with serious health issues. Yes, a few others die, but not nearly enough to justify for a millisecond closing down the entire fucking economy. Boy, I think I was angry when I wrote this. The entire fucking economy of the whole fucking world, almost. If 650,000 people dying every single year of the seasonal flu, according to the WHO, the World Health Organization, is not enough to shut down the economies of the world, and it shouldn't be, then tens of thousands of people, at most, dying who did not have serious health issues is not either. Now, I have little problem with governments telling those with serious health issues and or weakened immune systems to quarantine themselves, though I still 100% am against them forcing these people to stay inside. And I even have no problem with them financially helping those people who are in the danger zone, like Kenny Loggins. No, like are in this medical danger zone. But I do have a freaking ginormous problem with governments forcing otherwise healthy people who have only the tiniest chance of dying of COVID-19 to shut down their lives. This was a monumentally stupid thing for governments to do. And almost all of them did it. Not Sweden, though, for one. Good for them. Now, what did we learn from this? If you have half a brain and or you do not have wet spaghetti for a spine and or you have a halfway decent open mind, we learned four things primarily. One, that almost all governments are incompetent to the point of being dangerous. We know now that they will destroy entire economies and frighten billions of people if it just gets them more political power. We now know that most governments are almost complete and total human scum. Jeez. They do not care about people. They only care about power and control, 95% of them. And they do not care how many people have to suffer and die so long as they get to exercise this power. They do not care how many lives, small businesses have to be destroyed just so they can feel that emotional, orgasmic splurge of power lust. We know that 80 to 90% of politicians are almost certainly virtual vermin. Jeez, I was angry. They are dangerous to humankind. By the way, I'm agreeing with everything I'm saying here. Just some of the words I'm using are a little dramatic. That's the only thing I'm saying. I'm not sure. Vermin's a bit much. Maybe, I think I'll change that. We know that 80 to 90% of politicians are almost certainly terrible people. It doesn't sound, that sounds too nice. Anyway, they are dangerous to humankind if every one of them dropped dead today, the world would be a better place. 100% guaranteed. I do agree with that, by the way. No, I am not calling for violence to come to them in any way. But I literally hope these 80 to 90% all drop dead of natural causes. Holy crap, I was angry. But they are beyond useless and beyond saving, in my opinion. Okay, that's a bit too strong. Okay, I changed that. We know that 80 to 90% of politicians are almost certainly terrible people. They are dangerous to humankind, and if every one of them dropped dead today, the world would be a better place. 100% guaranteed. No, I'm not calling for violence to come to them in any way. However, they are too far gone to hope they will evolve politically, and the faster they are out of politics, the better for humanity. If women were in charge, would they be any better? Well, they might be as arrogant and overprotective, but I highly doubt they would get such a rush of sheer joy for being able to exercise ultimate power over everyone, like during the COVID-19 hysteria. Some might, but to not nearly the extent that most men do. No, women rulers are miles from a perfect solution. But if it were between men and women, I am positive women will do a miles better job with situations like this, simply because they have less negative instincts, as I said before, that allows them to derive intense pleasure from power. If this had happened with women running the world, I think they would have overreacted and shut lots of things down. But since most of them are not as lusting for power as men, and generally are, with exceptions, more sensitive, compassionate, I think they would have been able to see the situation more clearly than most male politicians have. They would have looked at the data that shows that COVID-19 is being overblown much more clearly, and I think they would be far more open to the obvious solution, which was to isolate those at risk and let everyone else live as normal, because they would have minded losing ultimate power far less than average male politicians would. And at the very least, it is virtually impossible that they could have fucked it up as totally as the male-dominated political world has. No chance. We now know for a fact that the mainstream media cannot be counted on in the slightest for the truth. They need the ratings and profits of those ratings, since they are losing their market share to the internet, so many other news sources, so fast. So instead of posting an unbiased viewpoint of COVID-19, they chose the let's try and frighten as many people as possible approach. Because obviously frightened people watch the MSM, mainstream media, far more than calm people do. The MSM could at one time, say 30, 40 years ago, be moderately trusted, in my opinion. Those days are officially over. Actually, they have been over for a long time. But COVID-19 put the final nail in their coffin of respectability. The MSM is completely useless, and actually they've become part of the problem. 3, unfortunately, we also know that at least 75% of all human beings are sheep. Scare them even a little, excuse me, scare them even a little and they will collapse in a heap and go running to daddy MSM and mommy government, or vice versa. The masses are largely children in essence. They cannot be counted on for anything when they are under even the slightest confusion and or fear. When focused, they can be wonderful. But when scared, they're actually worse than useless, as they will run around like headless chickens, frantically searching for someone, something to make it all better. If there was any doubt in anyone's decent mind that this were true, it has now been proven once and for all. About 67 to 90, about 2/3 to 4/5 of humanity is staggeringly easy to trick, scare, and or con. And 4, the laws in place to guarantee people their rights and freedoms are woefully inadequate. Whether it's the U.S. Bill of Rights, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, or any other constitution of any other country. Either the laws are too weak and or they do not have enough teeth to stop their politicians, major bureaucrats, circumventing them whenever they wish, and the spineless masses, for the most part, freely letting them. So, what now? What can you do with a race of people led by almost all So now what? What can you do with a race of people led by almost all people who cannot be trusted for a... That sounds awful. Let's try it again. So now what? What can you do with a race of people led by politicians who cannot be trusted for a second, informed by an MSM that is beyond useless, and whose politician is made up of roughly 3/4 who seem to have spines of water-satiated pasta, plus a bunch of unbreakable, quote-unquote, unbreakable rights and freedoms that have all the strength of wet tissue paper? What to do about this situation? You ignore the MSN. You kick men out of all parts of government and give women a try for at least a generation. And you put laws in place that force people to start thinking for themselves and stop giving all, and I mean all, of their power to the government every time things get a whittle whitening. And what laws would those be? Laws that A, allow us to kill ourselves whenever we wish, once we are 18 plus, for any reason. And the onus is on the government to prove by medical, psychological certainty that we are not sane. Not us to prove that we are. In other words, just as we are innocent until proven guilty, we should be sane until proven to be insane. B, allow us to do anything we wish to ourselves, no matter how dangerous, so long as it does not directly put another person in danger against their will. In other words, if we want to go outside and go to a bar while COVID-19 is raging, we should be able to do just that. They are our bodies to do with what we will, not the government's. We may consume any substance, alcohol, heroin, battery acid, I keep saying battery acid, anything we wish, and the government has no say over it whatsoever, so long as our actions are not directly, not indirectly, but directly hurting others physically, and not just mentally, emotionally. C, and we should be able to travel anywhere we wish so long as we have permission, if it is private property, or there is no blanket limitation on all people if it is public property. The bottom line is we must put laws into place that take all power over our bodies and health from the government and give it all back to us, assuming we are 18 plus years old and have not been proven to be insane. This is vital, and it will never again allow the government to destroy our lives in the name of protecting us. But you might be asking, we already have such laws. Many countries have constitutions, charters, etc. that guarantee its law-abiding citizens these things already. And you'd be 100% correct. However, they clearly are not doing the trick, since governments almost everywhere are simply ignoring these laws for our own protection. And why is that? Because these laws have no bite, no teeth. They specify the law, but they give little to no idea what the punishment is for breaking it. It's like having a murder law but not specifying a punishment if you commit a murder. I realize I said this before a little bit, but I'm saying it again. It's like having a murder law but not specifying a punishment if you commit a murder. You have to stipulate a punishment or there is no consequence if you break said law. And this is why there must be stipulations of penalties for politicians that do not honor these personal freedom laws. Like what? Like if a politician votes for a law that circumvents a personal freedom right in any way, then that politician is immediately kicked out of politics in that country on any level permanently. As well, they must immediately start serving a, say, 2-year prison sentence in a prison not under house arrest that must be served in full. No out early with good behavior nonsense. I'm going to add that in. That should do the trick. That should do the trick and stop any scumbag or politician from trying to take away people's personal freedoms. And if that penalty is not enough, make it harsher, like 5 years in prison, or 10, or 20 plus. I really don't care. Whatever it takes to stop politicians taking away our rights to our own bodies. It is critical that 18-plus-year-old human beings have full and complete control over our bodies and our lives, including our businesses, providing that they are not breaking a fraud or environmental law, possibly health and safety as well. This would obviously include the legalizing of recreational drug use for 18-plus-year-olds and lighter drugs for 14 to 17-year-olds. The war on drugs is flat out insane. It does nothing to stop drug use and just helps to fill prisons with a bunch of people who are doing nothing worse than selling and or consuming various recreational drugs. Whereas the sale and consumption of another recreational drug, alcohol, goes on completely legally. Plus, most drugs that are presently illegal in America, for example, were at one time legal in America, like cocaine and heroin. America was not flying off the rails when those two were legal. But what happens when you make a recreational drug illegal? The same thing that happened when alcohol was illegal during Prohibition. The price goes sky high, organized crime is greatly strengthened, and a lot more people go to jail. Sure, less people consume it, but still huge numbers. So what would happen if you made cocaine legal again? It would probably be roughly 2/3 to 3/4 cheaper than it is right now. That would mean that it would be roughly as expensive as booze in a bar, or cheaper. So people would not need to do illegal things to raise the necessary funds to pay for it. I don't recall ever hearing someone rob a bank for beer money. It may have happened at one time or another, but I certainly have never heard of it. Prostitution would go down, since most escorts do what they do for the drug money. Cut the price by 3/4 and you cut the number of tricks these men and women need to do to acquire the necessary funds to satiate their drug habit. Plus, other people would not need to steal money to raise the currency needed to support their habit. Right now, it is virtually impossible for anyone whom is not rich to make enough money to support a full-blown cocaine habit through legal means. Cut its price by 75% and it becomes possible. And if that happens, when users could do normal jobs during the week, then users could do normal jobs during the week and then get high on the weekends. Don't think that is often how it works? You would be wrong. In my younger days, I knew a fair number of people that especially did crack cocaine. The gals almost always worked in the adult entertainment field, so they would get a relatively consistent influx of cash. So they would, the ones that I knew, get high almost as soon as they got cash. So they would more or less be in a constant high, not high scenario. Whereas most of the male users I knew were different. They had steady jobs. One was an electrical engineer and one worked in his parents' manufacturing business. And they would save up their money for a week or two and then get high for most of the weekend, come down on Sunday, and then go back to work on Monday. Now, if crack cocaine, which is basically just smokable cocaine, but with a much more intense, shorter high, for about 75% cheaper, you could work even a minimum wage job, live in an apartment with with one or two other addicts to save money, save up more money, party on the weekend, and live a normal life otherwise. These people would be law-abiding in every way. The drugs they were smoking would be much safer. You never know what street drugs are mixed with. Since they would be regulated and they would actually be helping society. I'll say this again. The drugs they were smoking would be much safer since you never know what street drugs are mixed with, since they would be regulated. Try it again. The drugs they were smoking would be much safer since you never know what street drugs are mixed with, and since they would be regulated, they would actually be helping society since they would be paying both income taxes and the inevitable sales tax on the drugs they consume. Finally, it would be far easier for them to get counseling for their addiction since their choice of drug is their drug of choice is legal. It would be win-win for everyone. The only thing that might increase is petty theft, since petty cash would be all a lazy user would need to get high for a while. But which is better, more pickpockets and less serious criminals? Or the reverse? And the pros? Less crime, more tax revenue, less addicts, injured, dying through poorly cut drugs, less policing required so they can spend their time fighting more serious crimes, and these addicts would have a far easier time getting help for their addiction problems. And please save the nonsense that legalization would increase usage drastically. No one, and I mean no one, wakes up and says, I think I will try heroin for the first time today. I got that line off Dr. Ron Paul during his campaign for president years ago. Almost everyone knows heroin, crack cocaine, and meth are serious drugs that do great harm to you. The only reasons that people are going to start it then are the same reasons that they started today. Desperation and or they were lied to. Ending the war on drugs is a no-brainer. The only people who would hate it would be organized criminals who lose all that drug money. There is virtually nothing for the argument of making recreational drugs illegal, except ignorance. Finally, the number one reason to me why recreational drugs should be legalized, it is none of the effing government's business what sane adults put in their bodies. None. It is my body and my life. Governments freely allow people to jump out of planes, skydiving, which is highly dangerous and gives quite an adrenaline high, I know firsthand, or race cars, or beat each other to the point of unconsciousness, boxing, ultimate fighting, or play sports that often get people killed. These are all highly dangerous and destructive pastimes, yet the government lets us do them. But consuming recreational drugs is illegal? Nonsense, hypocrisy, and more nonsense. The war on drugs ridiculousness must be stopped, for everyone's sake, except organized criminals. And since the government will, if this law passes, have control over what we do with our bodies, that doesn't make sense. And since the government will, if this law passes, no longer have control over what we do with our bodies, then it naturally goes without saying, in my opinion, that this automatically legalizes prostitution. Illegal prostitution to me is a giant hypocrisy. Illegal drug use, at least I can understand it, even if it is ridiculously wrong. The government could argue that they are trying to protect people from harmful drugs. Still wrong, but at least the argument holds some degree of logic. But illegal prostitution? How many marriages over the last 200 years have been based on the woman marrying the man primarily because he was wealthy? Too many to count. And how the heck is that not prostitution? The woman marries and I assume has sex with a man largely solely on the basis of the amount of money, standard of living, she can garner. Were the man to lose this money, the woman would probably and understandably leave him immediately. The sugar daddy scenario. And of course there's the sugar mommy scenario. Which goes in the reverse. It still goes on today, though much less so since women have far more money-making opportunities than they did even 60 years ago. And that is prostitution, the exchange of money for sexual favors. Morally, I have zero problem with prostitution except for one thing, infidelity. The vast majority of those men who frequent escorts are married, perhaps as high as 80-90%. And the escort usually is aware of the fact that the client is married. That is not cool. Now, if the client's wife was fully aware and fine with what her husband was doing, unlikely, then I have no problem with it at all, morally. Though I have known some escorts as friends, and the lifestyle can take a toll on them emotionally, understandably. Anyway, the legalizing of prostitution is another no-brainer in my book. What two consenting adults over 18 do with each other in private is 100% their business and not the government's. Also, legalizing prostitution would make it far safer for all concerned. One, the prostitute would be regulated. She would be expected to have regular blood tests to make sure she is clean. She may even have to have an escort license. So their patrons and their partners will be far safer in that way. Two, the escort will have no need for a pimp bodyguard. If the client gets out of line, the escort can just call the police, something they might be hesitant to do now. This will also save the escort money for said pimp bodyguard, and she can save the money she requires, and she can make the money she requires in less time and with fewer customers. Three, the escort can freely advertise and not have to use a service, quote, saving her money. Four, there is a better chance she will pay taxes on her income. It will be harder for her to justify to the, say, in America, Internal Revenue Service, that she made no money escorting, even though she renewed her, quote, escort license, unquote, every month for the entire year. No, it is, I would assume, incredibly difficult for the IRS to prove how much an escort has made during a tax year. So this means more money for taxpayers. This is another win-win situation for legalizing prostitution. Anyway, in my opinion, the key to getting these laws of far greater personal freedoms is by getting the government to allow us to commit suicide for any reasons. I have long wondered why governments were so incredibly reluctant to allow us to be able to legally kill ourselves. Then I figured it out. If they lose that right, they lose a ton of power. If we can commit suicide anytime we wish for any reason, then we can legally do almost anything. We can ride motorcycles without helmets, not wear seatbelts, do illegal drugs like meth and heroin, take more prescription drugs than we are legally allowed, go outside during a pandemic, and just about anything else, so long as it does not directly put others in danger. Let's say I was pulled over for not wearing a seatbelt. I could just say, under the legalized suicide law, that I was doing it to kill myself. Not by deliberately crashing my car, but just in the normal course of driving. I assumed that eventually I would get in an accident and die from not wearing my seatbelt. Well, there would be nothing the police officer could do, since it is my right to kill myself for any reason I wish. The same with shooting heroin or going to a crowded bar during a pandemic or any other thing that puts me in greater danger. It is none of the government's business, since I can just claim I am doing all these things to kill myself. That has, in my opinion, got to be the main reason that the government flatly refuses to allow us to commit suicide. Except if we have terminal health conditions sometimes. Not because they give an excrement about us, but because so long as they have that power, they can stop us doing anything that might cause us harm. They are responsible for our health under the law, and that is a power they do not wish to give up. Of course, they will probably never admit this, but there is no other explanation that makes sense to me. That is why suicide is the most important one. And I think if we get that right, it will clear the way for all the other ones. Legal recreational drugs, no more power over us during pandemics, and many more. I may have listed this as number 5, but this is the law that I am by 5 of the big 6, but this is the law that I am by miles most interested in getting passed. I'm going to say that one again because it's important to me. I may have listed this as number 5 of the big 6, but this is the law that I am by miles most interested in getting passed. All the others I believe in very strongly, but this is the one that angers me the most, that we do not have the right etched in stone and unbreakable. This is the one that drove me to write this book the most, and this is the one that the world, especially the mid-upper wealthy countries, most desperately needs, in my opinion. We cannot let government take total power over us every time there is a new virus or excuse. We know for a fact that almost all of them lust for power. This virus has proven that once and for all, especially male ones. Male politicians, I mean. I'm going to say that again. We know for a fact that almost all of them lust for power. This virus has proved that once and for all, especially male politicians. Do you really think the next time there is a virus or some other bug that looks serious, that they will not jump on the chance to shut everything down so they can take total command of our lives again? How much more does government have to take away from us before we say enough? that we legally take back our rights that maybe we have never even had, even though we might haven't thought we did? I don't understand that sentence. Just try it again. How much more does government have to take away from us before we say enough? We must legally take back rights that maybe we have never even had, even though we might have thought we did. Why am I... You can tell I've never written a book before. How many more times does government have to shut everything down for our own good? Just tell us so that we can know. One more time. Oh, okay, I get this now. Sorry, I'm just learning as a bit as I go. How much more does government have to take away from us before we say enough? How many more times does government have to shut everything down for our own good? Just tell us so that we can know. One more time. Okay, now I get what I was trying to say. How much more does government have to take away from us before we say enough? How many more times does government have to shut everything down for our own good? Just tell us, you 80% of the masses who seem to think that the shutdown is a good thing, so that we can know. One more time? 5 more? 10? Just give us a number. Or is there even one? I suspect with most weak people there is not. They love having a big government to protect and control them whenever the boogeyman comes calling. That is why this is going to be such an uphill battle. But I personally think it is critical to humanity's future. I'd like to say that one again. But I personally think it is critical to our future quality of life. Yeah, that's better. Okay, that was 5. Now 6, or the big 6. Every law-abiding human must have automatic access to clean, safe shelter, food, water, clothing, internet, full health care, and free local transit. I think it is time that every human being can fully expect a minimum standard of living simply by being a law-abiding citizen. And this should be for every human on earth. What is that standard? A small apartment, a maximum of 200 to 300 square feet. It has a fridge, a stove, a kitchen sink, a bathroom with a tub shower, toilet, and possibly a sink, twin-size bed, a table chair, or an easy chair to relax in. The apartment will have a window, real or virtual, and obviously the apartment will be heated, possibly cooled as well. It will also include free access to high-speed internet. Obviously the apartment would be larger for a family. Also, free sustainable food and water, full government medical care, reasonable access to free local public transit, free basic clothes if needed, perhaps a small amount of money each month as well, say $50 to $100. I'm not sure about that one. A little hesitant about that one, but all of this will have 3 buts. 1, the person must relocate to a city to get these benefits, as they will only be available in major regional centers. 2, the person receiving this must, if physically, mentally able, work between 12 and 24 hours per week for no pay for the government in return for this. 3, this will only be available to law-abiding citizens. Speaking of law-abiding citizens, I do not believe that illegal aliens should be eligible to government welfare. Now, the whole illegal immigration subject is very complicated and best left for another time, but I definitely do not think that taxpayer money should go towards the welfare of illegal immigrants. If some citizens want to help illegal immigrants with the basics of survival, they can through charities or gifts, but the government should not be in the business of granting free welfare to illegal immigrants. Anyway, I think this proposal law standard is very important to humanity going forward. Every human on earth should be guaranteed shelter, food, water, clothes, full medical care, transit care system, and have available internet access, all for free and guaranteed by the state. People need to stop fearing for their survival. Even countries that provide welfare do not always provide enough of these things. And besides, giving out money is the wrong way to do it. It invites fraud and misuse. People often use their welfare money for beer, cigarettes, lottery tickets, fast food, and other things that welfare is not supposed to be providing. It would be far cheaper just to build welfare facilities and let people use them if they need them. Also, the fact that welfare recipients would help build and or run the facilities would greatly lower the construction maintenance costs. It would be win-win. Win for the taxpayers, as this type of system would, after the initial construction costs, cost far less per fiscal year to run than they would be paying in welfare costs now in most relatively wealthy nations. You would have the structures and most of the personnel to run them. All you would need is maintenance, food, and utility costs, plus incidentals. The buildings would be built large, solid, and simple. As little drywall, wood as possible, and simple reinforced concrete walls with exposed, safely covered wiring, plumbing, making maintenance, repairs, upgrading simple. Food would be distributed in relatively limited selections. This would ensure that all money going to food would go to reasonably healthy food, not fast food or donuts, chocolate, candy, etc. If they want those things, they could find part-time jobs if they wish. And since the food drinks would be standard across the country, great discounts for bulk purchasing could result. The food would also be vegan, as this saves lots of money, with added vitamin supplements. If people want coffee, tea, beef, cheese, or milk cream, they will have to get it themselves. There will, however, be baby formula for babies and fruit juices available with no added sugar and from concentrate. I realize many people say that coffee is a virtual staple. I could care less. No one needs coffee to survive, and again, if they want it so badly, get a part-time paid job and have all the coffee you wish. How could this system work? I will use an example of a place I know personally. Iowa, USA. Go Hawkeyes. In this case, were I in charge of the program, I would build 2 large regional centers in Iowa. One in Iowa City in the east of the state, one in Des Moines in the west of the state. Now let's say that your financial situation got dire indeed. Your home and car were repossessed. So you go to the nearest city in Iowa where the weekly regional center bus goes through with a couple of suitcases of your clothes essentials. This bus will be owned and operated by one of the major regional centers and driven by someone at the major center whom is receiving benefits. You would go to the nearest major regional center, say in Iowa City, and there you would be checked. It would take only a couple minutes by the police at the center to make sure you are a citizen and not wanted by the law. After you pass this, you can enter the center in one of its 3 areas for seniors, families, and singles couples. For the first month or so, you would have a cot and a locker to place your belongings in. If you need additional storage, you will have to find it yourself. After the month is up, and if you start working in the facility for the minimum 12 to 24 hours per week, assuming you were mentally, physically able to do so, you could then get a 200 to 300 square foot apartment in the singles couples area for as long as you need it and kept working at the shelter. You could get free basic clothing if you needed it, like track pants, t-shirt, flannel shirt, socks, basic sneakers, and a coat. You would have to provide your own underwear. You could also get free food to cook in your apartment, or you could eat in the meal center in the building. You would have free Wi-Fi in the cot area and a free direct high-speed internet connection in your apartment. There would also be a walk-in clinic that you could use for free, as you would have full and free government health care. There would, in addition, be a place where you could carry out basic exercises, walking, jogging, etc. If you did not want to work at the shelter any longer, you would have to go back to the cot area. If you started to break the rules, but not actual laws, you could be assigned to the jail area, where you would stay in a cell supervised by the local police. It would be just like a regular jail cell, but you would be free to leave the building whenever you wish. And when you came back, you would have to go to your cell again until your sentence is over. Then you would go back to the cot area and go from there. You could come and go from the center anytime you wish, 24 hours a day, though you would be expected to make minimal noise while in the sleeping area. Living at these shelters would not be overly comfortable or in any way luxurious, but it would be clean, safe, with constant police presence, patrols, and reasonably quiet. A tolerable living situation until you get back on your feet. In addition to the benefits offered, this system would ensure far less money is wasted and fraud committed by citizens would be almost impossible. Finally, many times people on welfare have a very hard time finding affordable housing, especially in cities. Often they have to live in tiny rooms in iffy buildings because that is all they can afford. Whereas this law would guarantee them a decent, clean, and small apartment with all they need for an acceptable life. And it is not just for giving every human peace of mind. Providing these benefits would also mean that there should be no practical reason to to not allow the economy to be completely free market, since people will have guaranteed basic living arrangements and will not require paid employment to have them. This would also remove the idea that a minimum wage, which I do not agree with, by the way, has to be a living wage, since every citizen will already be guaranteed a decent living. Heck, this will remove the need for a minimum wage at all, like they have in Scandinavia, where they have no minimum wage despite having the reputation of being very progressive. This will help to make businesses more competitive by slowing their rise in labor costs. And on the flip side, this means people can afford to be pickier about the jobs they take. They do not have to take jobs they hate just to get by. Hopefully, this will also empower workers and companies to never again do things they really do not wish to do. Hopefully this will empower workers in companies to never again do things they really do not wish to do for fear of losing their job and possibly their basic standard of living. It would also make it easier for people to leave bad home life situations, battered women and children, as they would have guaranteed living arrangements. And since the shelters would be split up into those with and those without children, if a woman wants to leave her physically abusive husband, she simply packs up the children and their essential belongings and goes to a shelter. She will then be safe there, as the abusive husband will not be allowed to enter the family area without a court order. And even then, I assume it would be supervised. Either way, the woman can feel safe and also know that she and her children can stay there as long as they like. By the way, these shelters would include schools for grades 1 to 8. Maybe higher if those in the shelter arrange it. The school will be taught by those in the shelter to save money. And online schooling might even be an option with a professional teacher teaching large numbers of students online at various shelters. Either way, the children should still get an education. It is also important to have a fair number of child recreational facilities, as I believe the children should be as happy as is reasonably possible. It is not their fault that their parents could not provide the basics for them. Why should they suffer any more than they have to? So the emphasis would be the basics for the adults and as much fun as possible for the little ones. There would be a large initial cost to build these shelters. That part of it's done. Now discuss the shelters on their own. There would be a large initial cost to build these shelters, but once they were finished, along with a steady increase to keep pace with population growth, the maintenance cost of this program would save taxpayers many billions of dollars in the long run and improve the quality of life for the world's poorest citizens. To me, it seems another no-brainer. Cheaper cost to the taxpayers, a guaranteed minimum standard of living to all people, while allowing businesses to rerun leaner, while largely removing the need for workers to do jobs they hate just to get by. Additionally, this would hopefully end all that universal basic income nonsense talk. Plus, stop all the minimum wage must be a living wage chatter as well. There will be no moral excuse for the economy not to be free market, and no moral excuse for the government to have almost anything to do with its country's economy again, outside of fraud, environmental, and possibly health and safety laws or rules. I honestly think this would benefit everyone in one way or another. Okay, that is the big 6. These are the first ones that I think are crucial for a decent country to have.